The jump takes 11 seconds. That is what they tell you at the academy. When they first put you through the simulator, with the lights off, and the chair bolted to a shaking platform and the instructor standing behind the glass watching your hands. 11 seconds of nothing. No stars, no orientation. No sensation of movement or mass or time. Just the inside of your own skull, which is louder than most people expect. 11 seconds, and then the real universe snaps back into place around you, like a fist closing. And you had better be ready for what it shows you. I have made 41 jumps in my career. I stopped counting the seconds after the third one. What I do now every time is keep my eyes on the sensor feed. The moment iron field clears transit and the arrays come live, I read what the universe is giving me, and I decide if we are still in the fight. That is the whole job. In the first heartbeat after a jump. Everything else is downstream from that red. This time, what the universe gave me was a dead star. It was not entirely unexpected. The charts we'd been working from, the ones the Reach had not managed to overwrite, the ones our people had smuggled out on drives buried in diplomatic couches and jacket linings, and once, famously, in a prosthetic leg. Those charts showed this system as Dominari claimed territory. The Reach had flagged it 211 years ago. A census stop, routine cataloging sweep. They had come through, taken their measurements, noted the absence of active civilization, logged the coordinates, and moved on to the next entry in their great ledger. The star at the center of this system had been dying even then, red dwarf in its long, graceless decline, throwing off flares in slow rhythms that fouled every passive sensor within 3 light minutes. Reach's cartographers had noted this too. It was one of the reasons they'd marked the system low priority for reclamation. Dead star. Dead species, no resources worth the transit cost. Move on, they had moved on, we had not. Jump complete, said Lieutenant Commander Park Hyun-soo from navigation. His voice carrying the particular flatness of a man who had trained himself not to let relief into his tone. Formation check. The sensor feed populated. One by one, the transponder signatures of the other 6 ships blinked into existence around us. Kestrel. Team. Ironvale. Chi. Steadfast March. Chert. Cobb's Ridge. Ard. Halyard. Challenge. Prue. Durova. 7 Wedge-class destroyers, each one crewed by men and women who had been told all their lives that they were the children of a dead people, and who had spent the last 6 years proving that assessment wrong. Formation intact, said Ensign Danai Adeyemi from Tactical. She was 23 years old, and she had never seen the Earth. Most of the crew hadn't. Neither had I, for that matter. I had been born aboard the Stistant, one of the generation ships that had been running dark in the outer systems for the better part of a century, long before the Dominari had ever turned their eyes in our direction. What the Earth looked like was a memory I had inherited rather than lived. Photograph of a place that no longer looked the way the photograph showed. But we were going back. That was the point of this. That was why we were here. In a dead system on the wrong side of the Reach's ledger lines, with a formation of destroyers, and a set of orders that had taken 9 months to ratify, because the Council had spent the first 6 of those months arguing about whether we were actually ready. I thought we were ready. I still think we were ready. Whether that matters, I will let you decide. Passive scan, I said. Full spectrum. I want to know what's in this system before we light anything active. Passive running, said Lieutenant Seo Ha-yoon from Sensors. She was good at her job. Methodical, unhurried, never the type to give me data before she trusted it. Taken her away from a research posting, because I needed someone on Sensors who understood that a half-second's patience was worth more than a full second of false confidence. Picking up the primary, red dwarf, class M, active flaring cycle, consistent with the charts. Rocky inner planets, no atmosphere on either. One gas giant at approximately 4 astronomical units, minor ring system. She paused. And 9 contacts bearing 074 by 21, range approximately 800,000 kilometers. Dormant drives. Civilian-grade power signatures. They are not moving 9. I sat with that number for a moment. Our intelligence had estimated between 6 and 12. depending on whether this was a standard sweep or an augmented one. 9 was inside that window. It also meant we were outnumbered slightly in hull count. Though hull count between a Dominari census formation and a Terran destroyer wing was never going to be a fair comparison in terms of told you about combat weight. Classification, I said, working. A few seconds passed. The passive arrays were pulling light from 8 minutes ago. The limitation of what we had to work with until we were willing to announce ourselves. 3 large contacts, census class most likely. Unarmed or lightly armed, depending on variant. 6 smaller escorts. I am reading what looks like. She stopped. Started again. Captain, I am reading active sensor arrays on the escorts. Narrowband sweep. They are not looking for us specifically. This appears to be a standard coverage pattern for a census stop. Not looking for us. Of course they were not looking for us. Why would they be? The last entry in the Dominari ledger for humanity had been filed 211 years ago. Non-viable population trend. Biological decline confirmed. Species outcome, terminal. They had noted our trajectory, the pandemics, the resource failures, the social fractures that had been tearing us apart, before they even arrived to observe. And they had done what their science told them to do. They had written down what the numbers showed and moved on. The numbers had been right in a narrow way. If you took the population curve we were on when their census scouts first swept our system, and you extended it forward without interference, without adaptation, without the particular human stubbornness that refuses to recognize a model's authority over its own future, then yes, you would get extinction, you would get silence. You would get a dead species in a dying star system, exactly as the ledger said. What the model had not accounted for was what happens when a species reads its own obituary. What the model had not accounted for was the generation ships. What the model had not accounted for was 200 years of cold fury, passed from parent to child like a genetic trait, burning quiet and patient in the dark between stars, until the day we had enough ships and enough crew and enough rage held carefully in check to come back to the ledger and make a correction. I thought all of this in approximately the time it took CO to finish her sentence. Then I put it away. All stations, go to action readiness, said. Keep drives at standby, no active sensors. We are going to hold here until I say otherwise. Captain, that was Park from navigation. He had the particular tone of a man with a question he wasn't sure was his to ask. If they haven't detected us yet. They haven't, I said, because we jumped in behind the star's flare shadow, and our jump signature read as a flare artifact on passive scan. That window is approximately 8 minutes before their array cycle and get a second look at us. I intend to use those 8 minutes. For what, ma'am? I looked at the sensor feed. 9 Dominari contacts sitting quiet in a dead system, running a census sweep on a species they believed had been gone for 2 centuries. For giving them the chance to leave, I said. The iron field had been commissioned 11 years ago. In the orbital yards above Meridian Station is the largest installation humanity has ever built, and which most of the galaxy does not know exists. She was 260 meters of wedge-shaped Terran engineering, narrower at the bow than a Dominari escort by nearly 30%, heavier in the keel by a margin that our designers had argued about for years before concluding that the extra mass was worth the transit cost. Hull plating was 3-layered, composite. The outer skin scorched in a dozen places by the kind of wear that accumulates when you have taken a ship through the outer systems for the better part of a decade without access to a full repair dock. She was not beautiful. None of the 7 were particularly beautiful. They were working ships built for endurance over elegance, designed to be repaired in the field with whatever we had available. Maintained by crews who understood that beauty was a luxury that belonged to civilizations with the surplus to afford it. We were not at this moment that kind of civilization. But we were alive, and we were here, and that counted for more than beauty ever had. I had been given command of Iron Field 8 years ago, at the rank of commander, by Admiral Vasquez, who had looked at me across a table in a briefing room aboard Meridian and said, in her particular way, that brooked no ambiguity, that she needed someone on that bridge who understood what we were actually doing out here, not the tactical objective, Not the strategic framework, the actual thing, the weight of it. I told her I understood. She looked at me for a long moment, and then she said, I hope so. Because the day we make contact with the Reach, the thing you understand is going to matter more than anything else on that ship. I had spent 8 years thinking about what she meant by that. Captain, CO's voice, 6 minutes remaining before their cycle. I'm picking up a signal from the lead census ship. Routine broadcast. Pressed format. I think it's a maintenance ping to their own network, not directed at us. Copy that. I looked at Park. Open a channel on the Reach's diplomatic frequency. Standard hail. Identification package included. I want them to know who we are before I do anything else. There was a pause. Park was a professional. Shh. And professionals don't argue with orders on the bridge of a ship at action readiness. But I could see the question behind his eyes. Is that wise? Maybe not. Maybe announcing ourselves before we had any tactical positioning was the kind of decision that the after-action review would file under suboptimal initiative sequencing. But I had read the ledger entry. I had read it many times in the years since we'd recovered those smuggled charts. And I had decided that the first thing the Dominari Reach was going to learn about humanity, the very first data point in whatever new entry they were about to open in their great catalog, was that we did not attack without introduction. They had written us off as animals in decline, predictable, running the same population curves as every other species they had watched die. Wanted their first correction to that file to be something they did not expect from a dying species. Channel open, said Park. Dominari census formation, I said, in Standard Reach, which I had been studying for 6 years because I knew this day was coming. This is Captain Yan Jisoo of the Terran Federated ship Ironfield, leading Terran Expeditionary Vanguard. We are 7 ships. We are entering this system with peaceful intent. You are operating in territory that humanity claims under prior occupation. We are prepared to discuss jurisdiction. Please respond. Close the channel. Now we go active, I said. Full sensor array, navigation, bring drives to 30%. Tactical, full weapons display. I want everything we have showing on their passive scan. Formation, spread to combat distance. Do it slowly and do it in formation. Adeyemi looked at me. Slowly, I said again, because I want them to have time to see all 7 of us. And I want them to see that we are moving together. The Dominari Reach is 940 years old as a unified political entity. Shh. I want you to understand what that means, because it is the context for everything that followed. In 940 years, the Reach had catalogued, absorbed, or watched expire 412 distinct species. Of those, 61 had been what their taxonomy called apex tier, meaning they had achieved interstellar travels, sustained population growth across multiple systems, demonstrated what the Reach considered a durable civilization. Of those 61, 38 had been incorporated into the Reach's political structure in one form or another. 10 had declined incorporation and been classified as non-aligned tolerated, meaning the Reach had decided, for its own reasons, that the cost of removing them outweighed the benefit. 9 had resisted incorporation and been removed, and humanity was one of the remaining 0. Humanity was in a category by itself, because humanity was not supposed to exist anymore. There is a word in the Reach's administrative language that does not translate cleanly into any human tongue. The closest approximation is something like ledger sealed, a status applied to a species whose extinction has been recorded, confirmed, and filed. It means the case is closed. The entry is complete. The Reach does not review ledger sealed species. They are part of the historical record, not the operational one. We had been ledger sealed 211 years. I found out later, from the diplomatic translators who processed the Dominari signals in the hours after contact, what the first automated response from their lead census ship had been when our identification package came through. It was a system error code, not a communication, a computational error, because the Ironfield transponder had transmitted a species identifier that the Dominari census system's active files did not contain. It contained our identifier only in the historical archive, in the sealed records, in the section of their database that processed entries of species that were no longer relevant to operational planning. The census ship's computer had tried to match our identifier to an active file. It had found no active file. It had therefore generated an error code indicating a corrupted or invalid transmission. That error code had been routed to the duty officer aboard the lead census ship, a Dominari whose caste designation translated roughly as senior catalog keeper, and who had been in this system for 11 days, running standard sweep procedures, and who had, by all accounts, not expected this posting to be notable in any way. The duty officer had looked at the error code. The duty officer had looked at the sensor, return, showing 7 active warships on an approach vector. And then the duty officer had something that I was later told was almost without precedent in the 940-year administrative history of the Dominari Reach. He had gone to the historical archive himself, manually, and pulled the sealed file. He had read the entry for humanity. Non-viable population trend. Biological decline confirmed. Species outcome, terminal sealed. Year 4, 201 of the Reach's administrative calendar. He had read it. He had looked at his sensor screen again. 7 warships, moving in formation, casting an identification signal in standard Reach, in acceptable syntax, identifying themselves by species name. The species name in the sealed file. I have thought about what that duty officer must have felt in that moment, not as a military calculation, as a human experience, even translated across the biological gap. He had opened a file that was supposed to be closed forever. He had found something moving inside it. Something that was not supposed to be there. Something that was not supposed to be anywhere. I think he was afraid. I think whatever fear looks like for a predator-evolved species that has spent 9 centuries at the top of every hierarchy it has ever encountered. I think he felt that. And I think it made him do what he did next, which was to scramble his escorts. They came fast. That was the thing I had been briefed on, and still had to see to truly believe. Dominari escorts are built for speed in the same way that a hunting animal is built for speed. Not gracefully, not efficiently, but with a kind of total commitment that makes everything else secondary. They don't look fast from a distance. They look like armored blocks. Dense and angular, nothing like the sleek silhouettes you might expect from a civilization that prides itself on apex taxonomy. But they accelerate with a brutality that their mass doesn't suggest. And they do not bother with the kind of graduated approach that a human ship uses when closing on an unknown contact they closed. 6 escorts moving in 2 parallel lines of 3, bracketing what they had clearly decided was our most likely evasion axis. It was good tactical thinking, if we had been what they probably assumed. Some kind of sensor ghost or jump artifact or automated probe that had triggered a false positive. Then, closing fast and hard was the right call. Get eyes on it, confirm or deny, move on. If we had been what the ledger said we were, a species 2 centuries dead, then closing fast and hard had no cost, because you cannot threaten a ghost. Range to lead escort 400,000 kilometers and closing, said Adeyemi. Her hands were on the targeting array, not pressing anything yet, just resting. She had the posture of someone who was comfortable with waiting and who had learned the hard way that the first person to act in a contact situation is not always the person who controls its outcome. Rate of closure is high, Captain. They are not decelerating. I can see that. Orders? Hold formation, I said. All ships hold formation. Keep weapons displayed. Do not bring them to active targeting. Ma'am, at this closure rate we have approximately 4 minutes before. I know. I knew the math. I've been doing the math since the moment their escorts moved. 4 minutes to effective weapons range was also roughly the time it would take for any response to our diplomatic hail to have been composed and transmitted and received, given the distance and the standard processing lag of a Dominari administrative system that had just encountered a category error it had no protocol handling. What I was waiting for was the thing that would tell me whether this was going to be a fight or a conversation, not because I was afraid of the fight. We had not come this far to blink at the first show of teeth, but because the ledger entry we left behind, when this was over, was going to matter as much as the tactical outcome, probably more. The Admiral had told me to understand what we were actually doing. This was what we were actually doing. 2 minutes, said Adeyemi. Nothing on the diplomatic channel. 90 seconds. Nation, I said. Begin evasive pattern kestrel, all ships. Pattern kestrel was not a retreat. It was a lateral spread. The formation opening from tight column into a wide arc that presented maximum hull to approaching escorts whilst also making us a significantly harder targeting solution. It was a combat maneuver. Anyone looking at it would know it was a combat maneuver. But it was also not a charge. And I needed the duty officer on that census ship, watching his sensors to understand the difference. 60 seconds, said Adeyemi. Active targeting, I said. All ships, light them up. Targeting arrays went live. 6 escorts, painted by 7 destroyers simultaneously. Power output of that targeting lock would be visible on their passive sensors as clearly as a floodlight in a dark room. Hold fire, I said. Formation holds. No one fires first. If they fire, they're firing, said Adeyemi. They were firing. First salvo came from the lead escort. A single ranging shot, which was not a ranging shot in the traditional sense, because the Dominari do fire ranging shots. What they do, their equivalent of a warning shot, is fire at minimum yield at maximum range, which produces a hit that registers on your sensors and your hull plating but does not penetrate. It is a dominant signal. We have range on you. We are choosing not to kill you yet. It is the kind of gesture that works very well against species that have reason to fear the Reach. The shot took steadfast march along the port quarter and left a scorch line across 3 meters of outer plating. Steadfast march. Not break formation. Return fire, I said. Minimum yield. Target their weapons arrays. Do not target drives or crew spaces. Shh. Ironfield. Forward batteries opened up, so did Kestrel. Trid. Shh. Ironvale. Tune. Halyard. Cheered. Darova. Churi. Cheese. Cobb's Ridge. And steadfast march. Because whatever had just hit her starboard quarter had made her crew angry rather than afraid. And angry crews in Terran destroyers shoot straight. Followed was 47 seconds of the ugliest close-quarters destroyer engagement I have been part of before or since. The Dominari escorts were fast, and they were aggressive, and they were very good at what they did, which was closing and overwhelming. 2 of them got inside our foreshore perimeter before the arc could tighten, and the result was that Halyard, a direct hit to her midsection that put her secondary power plant offline and sent 30 meters of her port dorsal plating into open space, spinning. Her captain, Commander Lee Byung-woo, rerouted primary power in 14 seconds, I know, because I was watching the telemetry and brought Halyard into formation with her remaining weapons active and her drives at 60%. 14 seconds. I have read the after-action analysis on that engagement many times. The Dominari tactical database, from what we recovered in the years following, had logged Halyard sees response time in the category their system uses for anomalous data. Events that fall outside the parameters of expected behavior for a given classification of vessel. The expected response time for a ship of Halyard is apparent class, having taken that level of damage to secondary power, was between 90 seconds and 3 minutes, during which time standard doctrine would predict a break from formation and a reduction in combat capability as the crew managed the damage and triage. Halyard had not broken formation. Halyard had not reduced her engagement profile. She had been back in the fight in 14 seconds, her captain apparently deciding that the correct response to using 30 meters of dorsal plating was to get mad and shoot more accurately. I believe that was the moment the engagement began to turn. Not because of the tactical advantage, though. Halyard, coming back online before the escorts had finished processing her, as a kill shifted the geometry of the fight in our favor. Because of what it meant to a predator-evolved species that had spent 9 centuries cataloging exactly what dying looks like. Halyard had not died right. The escorts had hit her hard enough to kill her, by the model, and she had shaken it off and kept shooting. Psst. And then, psst, Ironfield had come around on the port flank of their lead element and put 3 direct shots into their weapons array. Not kills. I was not trying to kill them, but Ironfield is 260 meters of angry at this point, and her weapons crews had been waiting a long time for this particular moment, and the lead escort's primary forward battery went offline, and then something happened that I had not fully anticipated. The other escorts pulled back. Not a full retreat. They went to distance, 200,000 kilometers, which is well outside the effective range of a short engagement but not outside sensor range. They held there. The lead escort, damaged, did to join them. The formation held at distance. Ceasefire, I said. All ships cease fire, hold formation. Silence on the bridge. The kind of silence that comes after guns stop, which is a very specific quiet. It has texture to it, the absence of something loud. Damage report. I said. Halyard is functional, reduced capacity, said Park. Commander Lee reports 22 crew casualties, 3 critical. Requesting medical support when available. Secondary power is offline but primary is holding. She can make jump speed. Sheer. Cobb's Ridge. Port's minor hull breach, outer compartments only sealed, Adeyemi added. No casualties. She is at full combat readiness. And the others? Intact. Steadfast march. Has the scorch on her quarter, but no penetration. Everyone else is clean. I looked at the sensor feed. 6 Dominari escorts at 200,000 kilometers. 3 census ships beyond them. Further out having not moved. The formation diagram was very clear. They were watching us. We were watching them. Diplomatic channel, I said. Open, said Park. I did not say anything for a moment. I let the silence go out on the channel. Let them hear that we were in no hurry. Let them hear that a 22 casualty and a blown secondary power plant was still in formation and still not asking for terms. Then I said, Dominari census formation, this is Captain Yoan Jisoo. Ironfield. Terran Expeditionary Vanguard. We remain in system. We are not withdrawing. We are prepared to resume diplomatic contact at your convenience. Our medical offer stands. If any of your crew were injured in the engagement, we will provide assistance. We are in no hurry. I closed the channel. 11 minutes and 32 seconds later, the lead census ship transmitted. It was a single word. In the Dominari administrative language, there is a formal term used when a ledger entry is found to be in error and must be corrected. It is used at the end of an auditing process, when the keeper responsible for the record has confirmed the discrepancy and submitted the revised data. It is a bureaucratic word. It has, as far as anyone can determine, never in the 900-year history of the Reach been applied to a ledger sealed. Species entry. The word, translated into the closest standard Reach equivalent, is corrected. Just the one word. I read it on the display twice. Then I turned to Park, who was looking at me with an expression I did not entirely know how to categorize. Somewhere between exhausted and something else. Something that does not have a clean name in any language I know. Log it, I said. Locked, he said. And get me a channel to Commander Lee. Channel opened. Lee Byung-woo's voice was calm, in the way that voices are calm when the person speaking them is managing pain and adrenaline, and the particular weight of having just survived something that had a real probability of going differently. His crew were calm too, from what I could hear in the background. Working, quiet, doing the things that need doing after a fight. Commander, I said. How are your people? Alive, Captain, he said. All 3 critical are stable. The medics say they'll hold until we can make Meridian. Good. I paused. You didn't break formation. There was a brief silence on the line. No, ma'am, he said. We didn't. That's what I thought. I paused again. Log it in your after action. I want the exact sequence documented. Power outage, response time, formation integrity, everything. Down to the second. Can I ask why? Because I said the Reach just opened a new file on us. And the first things they're going to put in it are the things they saw today. What they saw today is going to determine how they approach the next contact, and the one after that. I want the record on our side to match. Another pause. Understood, Captain. I closed the panel and turned back to the sensor feed. The Dominari formation had not moved. The census ships were still holding at distance, and the escorts had regrouped into a loose defensive cluster around them. No weapons were active. No approach vectors were developing. They were waiting. I understood that. The duty officer, whoever was actually running that census ship's command structure, had just filed a word in a ledger that had never held that before. He was doing what you do when you encounter data that falls outside every category your system contains. You stop, you assess. You do not act until you have some framework for understanding what you are dealing with. We had given them a lot of new data today. 7 warships crewed by a species 2 centuries dead. An opening diplomatic hail before weapons discharge. Minimum yield return fire, aimed at weapons systems rather than crew spaces. Continued formation integrity from a ship that had taken serious damage. A ceasefire and a standing offer of medical assistance. And a crew that had been waiting 200 years to be here and was in no hurry to leave. There is a thing that happens when you have been on combat readiness for long enough, and then the immediate threat recedes, and the adrenaline starts its long, slow walk out of your system. It is not a pleasant thing. It is not a dramatic thing. It is simply the body doing its accounting, tallying up what was spent and what remains and presenting the bill. I felt it around the 90-minute mark when it was clear the Dominari were holding at distance and not developing any new approach vectors. And Adeyemi had the watch, and I was standing in the small space behind the captain's chair that technically qualifies as a rest area if you are willing to apply the term generously. I thought about Halyard. I thought about the 22 casualties, the specific people, not the number, because by that point in my career I had learned that numbers are how you manage information and names are how you manage the weight of it, and you need both, and you cannot confuse them. I thought about the 3 who had been critical. The medics had said stable. Stable is a word that means things are not getting worse, which is not the same as saying things are good. I thought about the ledger entry. Non-viable population trend. Biological decline confirmed. Species outcome. Terminal. I had read that entry so many times, in so many contexts, over so many years, that it had become a kind of furniture in my thinking. Always there. Always in the same place. Always weighing the same. The Reach had looked at us at one of the worst moments in our history and had decided that what they were seeing was the end. They had been looking at the curve and extrapolating forward, and by the mathematics of it, they had not been wrong. If we had kept going the way we were going, if we had not done the things we did, the generation ships had not launched when they launched, and the council had not formed when it formed, and the yards had not been built, and the drives had not been engineered, and 1,000 other decisions made by people who were sometimes right and sometimes wrong, but who were always still here, then the ledger would have been correct. That is the thing I think about when I think about that entry. Not that the Reach was lying, not that they were wrong in some fundamental way about what they observed. They saw what was there. They processed what the data showed. Their error was not in the data. Their error was in the assumption that the data was the whole of the story, that the curve they had observed was the only curve available, that a species in decline is a species that will continue to decline, because that is what the previous 411 cases had shown. They had not accounted for the possibility that a species in decline might read its own trajectory and decide, as a collective act of will, to be angry about it. They had not put anger in the model. They had not put the particular human brand of stubbornness, the kind that looks at an obituary and treats it as a challenge rather than a conclusion, into any of their calculations. Because in 940 years, no species they had cataloged had done that. No other species had produced a generation ship program in the middle of its own collapse. No other species had sent people into the dark, specifically to preserve the capacity for exactly this kind of moment. No other species had come back to argue with the ledger. There is, in the Reach's taxonomy, no category for that. There was, until today, no file. Now there was a file. The diplomatic contact that followed the engagement lasted, in its initial form, 48 hours. Will not pretend it was a smooth process. The Dominari duty officer, who turned out to be the equivalent of a senior administrator rather than a military officer, which explained some of his decision-making, was working without precedent in every direction. He had no protocol for ledger sealed species that was not in fact sealed. He had no framework for interpreting our hail before engagement approach because the species he had experience with either attempted to negotiate before displaying force or displayed force and then attempted to negotiate a position of superiority, and we had done something that did not fit either category. What we had done was display force and offer medicine at the same time. That gave him trouble. I think it gave him trouble for longer than the 48 hours. But by the end of the initial contact, we had established three things: that humanity was not extinct, that humanity was willing to talk, and that humanity was willing to fight if talking was not offered. The census ship transmitted a formal notation at the end of the 48 hours, not a treaty. The Reach does not make treaties in a census context, because census context is administrative rather than diplomatic, and we had encountered them in their administrative capacity. What they transmitted was a category update, a revision to the entry, the sealed file, formerly unsealed species status, revised, active population confirmed, further assessment required. It was, as diplomatic outcomes go, modest. It did not give us territory. It did not give us recognition. It did not give us any of the things that would take years of contact and argument and negotiation, and probably more engagements to secure. What it gave us was the same thing the one-word transmission had given us, stated more formally. We were in the ledger again. We were alive in their records. Not as history. As present tense, I transmitted the category update to Meridian Station via compressed burst before we made jump. The council would have it in 6 hours. The analysis teams would begin their work. The diplomatic corps would begin preparing the formal approach that would take this from an administrative update to something with legal weight. And Halyard, Shin, would begin the journey back with 22 people who needed proper medical attention, in a ship with a hole in her side and 60% drives, and a crew that had not broken formation when breaking formation would have been the understandable thing to do. There is a question I have been asked more times than I can count in the years since the engagement, usually by people who are either very young or have spent a long time in roles that do not put them near the operational reality of what we do out here. The question is always some version of the same thing. Were you afraid? I will tell you what I was. I was calculating. I was watching sensor feeds and formation telemetry and the closing rate of 6 escorts and the translation lag on the diplomatic channel. I was doing the math. I was managing the decision tree that tells you, given the current state of the board, what your next move is and what that move forecloses and what it preserves. I was the captain of a ship with a crew aboard it, and the captain's job is to bring the ship and the crew home, and everything else is downstream of that. Was I afraid? I was aware of the stakes. I was aware of what it meant to be here in this system, with this formation, doing this specific thing. I was aware that if I made wrong decisions, people on my ship and the other 6 ships would pay for those decisions. I was aware that if I made right decisions, we might begin the process of changing the Reach's understanding of what humanity is. Not the footnote in a sealed file, not the cautionary entry in the historical record, but something they had to account for in present tense. I was aware of all of that. I was calculating. I think that is close enough to afraid for the purposes of honest accounting. The thing I have not been able to get out of my head in all the years since is the duty officer. Not because of anything he did that was remarkable. What he did was what his training and his system and his very long institutional tradition told him to do. He received anomalous data. He assessed it. He made a defensive decision. And when the defensive decision produced unexpected results, he stopped and revised. He was doing his job correctly. His job happened to put him at the intersection of what his ledger said and what his sensors showed. And the gap between those two things was too large to bridge without a category error. And he filed the word because that was what the situation required. But I think about him receiving that identification package and pulling the historical archive I think about him opening a file that his system had marked as permanently closed and finding and inside it the signal of 7 active warships. I think about what a gap of 200 years looks like when you are looking at it from the other side. We had been in the sealed file. We had been history, resolved and categorized and set aside. And then something had moved in the history and come through a jump point and started broadcasting in standard reach. The administrative horror of that is not lost on me. In a civilization that has spent 9 centuries building a taxonomy of the universe, the worst possible thing is not an enemy you cannot beat. The worst possible thing is a category that does not behave as its classification requires. A sealed thing that does not stay sealed. A terminal entry that does not terminate. He had labeled us. That word is going to follow us for a long time. The Reach is going to have to decide what to do with a corrected entry, what category to put us in, what assessment framework applies, what their doctrine says about a species that was supposed to be gone and is not. That process is going to take years. It is going to involve people far above the duty officer's pay grade. It is going to involve, I suspect, some significant discomfort in the Reach's administrative hierarchy, because they are very good at closing files and not at all experienced with reopening them. That discomfort is not my problem today. My problem today is getting the troop field and 6 other ships back to Meridian Station without losing the 3 critical crew members aboard. Halyard. And writing an after-action report that does justice to what Commander Lee's crew did in 14 seconds with a blown secondary power plant and an escort trying to kill them. After that, someone else's problem will be to take what we started here and finish it. The negotiations, the legal framework, the border discussions, the long, slow work of establishing that we are not a historical entry, but a present tense civilization, claims and rights, and a formation of warships willing to enforce them. That work is going to take longer than any of us will live. I am at peace with that. The work that matters most is usually work you do not see the end of. What you do is carry your piece of it, as far as your legs will take you, and then you hand it to the people coming up behind you, and you trust that they will carry it further. We carried our piece today. We opened the file. Navigation, I said. Plot a jump back to Meridian. Best safe route priority on. Halyard. Drive limit. Plotting, said Park. I looked at the sensor feed one more time, the Dominari formation still holding at distance. The dead star behind us burning its long, slow burn. 7 destroyer transponders in formation, all of them reporting and none of them gone. We had been written off. We were here anyway, that is all the ledger needed to say. Jump when ready, I said.